Hi, everybody. I am very excited for today's session. For this one, we're talking about career coaches. And you might have noticed in a previous session, we talked about coaching within your company, but this is a different one completely. This is about when you look at your career, when does it need some extra help, some guidance from some experts? And speaking of experts, today I brought in one of my favorite people who I've known for 5+ years, Whitney Sieck. Maybe Whitney, tell the world tell the five people who don't know who you are, and maybe a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name again is Whitney Sieck, and I have over 15 years of experience in the revenue enablement space. With the balance of getting my start in sales and then moving into the L&D side, I think that combination has been really unique for a lot of my success in my career. And right now, I'm focusing on Enablement Enthusiast, which is my coaching and consulting business that is on a mission to elevate the enablement function from being reactive to being really strategic and recognized for that within businesses. And so there's a few different avenues that I work within that. I'll give a little shameless plug, which is the individual and executive coaching arm. A lot of that is what we're going to talk about today. That's for enablement practitioners and enablement leaders. I also do a lot of work with team coaching. So if there's focus on strategy or process workshops, I do some advising for startups that are looking to start an enablement function the right way.
Mhm.
And then finally, I do some influencer marketing and work with some of the enablement tech tools as well.
Very cool. You have your hand in a lot of pies there.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
so, when I met you, you were a practitioner. That was, I think,
Mhm.
primarily what you were doing. And at some point over the past few years, you made a slight pivot into, coaching. And so maybe like, how did you make that pivot?
Yeah, it's something that happened really organically. As I grew in my career, I recognized that I really felt a draw to being a servant leader to my teams. So the way that I talk about enablement, having internal customers with the go-to-market org, for me, my internal customers were enablement practitioners as I became a leader. And so my passions shifted to really focusing on that and making the most of that. And so it really became more and more of a focus as I started Enablement Enthusiast, which truly started as a passion project during the pandemic. It wasn't
Mm.
something where I set out and said, like, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to focus on this. I was highlighting experiences from my industry peers because I was missing some of the networking that was happening live when we all shut down. And that transitioned into me taking on a lot of mentors in this space. At the same time, I was at a hyper growth organization, growing a massive team from 2 to 20. So my day job was full already. I was starting to have those breakup conversations with mentees, and they were like, my company would cover this, right? Like, we've got budget for coaching. And so I was like, oh, this could actually be something. And it started to really just evolve and grow from there. Organically, it turned into a side hustle, and then from there, I was able to take it full time.
It's amazing. And if I forget, remind me to come back to the idea of when companies cover the cost. So I think
Yeah,
it's an important point that if I don't get to it, remind me to get to that because I think it's a really, really good point.
yeah,
So the purpose of this is really to break it down for those who don't have experience with coaching or coaches. So just what's a career coach? Let's just start there.
yeah. I think everyone has a different definition of what it means to be a coach, and it means something a little bit different internally as it does externally, like you talked about in your intro. For me, this is really thinking about transitions into or up and within an industry. So this could be something where you're looking to advance in your current role. It could be you're transitioning into a new position. And so for my focus specifically, I get a lot of like AEs or operational folks that want to move into enablement.
Yeah.
And then finally, it's around developing your skills. So whether that's your leadership skills or your more strategic skills, you're looking for promotion, like those are the types of things where I think a career coach can be really powerful.
And so, I talk to, tons of candidates, people who are navigating their careers, and sometimes they're struggling, sometimes they're thriving, and everywhere in between. And oftentimes when I'm talking to people, maybe they're a team of one and their boss doesn't really get enablement and they're just figuring out on their own as they go along. And oftentimes I say, you should get a mentor, right? You
Yeah,
should find a person at another company who's a little more experienced. Can you maybe just take a minute and distinguish boss versus mentor versus coach? Because I feel like they're all in some ways they serve the same purpose to elevate you, but they're all a little bit different.
absolutely. Here's my opinion. I
Okay.
think a boss manages day-to-day operations within a company. And so their focus is different. Their focus is on business outcomes. Like they are putting the business first and they're managing your performance. And so you own your career development within that. You'll probably hear that from managers in the past, but you have to advocate for yourself and you have to learn how to promote your own career internally. Like it's not a boss's job to technically do that. The good ones will, but like that's not technically within the term boss in my mind. The mentor side is more of what like an informal advisor would be. You've heard maybe the phrase that like we all need our own personal board of directors, people that will share different experiences with us, help us maybe see around corners, and provide resources. And I think that that's why it's really cool in the enablement space because you can see things that other people are doing where you don't get that exposure when you're a team of one in particular.
Yeah.
A coach, in my opinion, is going to be someone who asks the right questions, someone that will challenge assumptions, someone who's going to provide like really tailored strategies and frameworks and accountability to achieve your goals, which are custom to you, right? Like everyone's goals are unique. So I think that's really where a coach comes in handy. The one that you didn't ask for that I think is actually important to distinguish too is like the concept of a counselor, right? Like
Oh,
where a coach is going to look forward, a counselor is someone who really like makes you look back. And so I think, oh, are you there?
absolutely. Here.
Okay, technical difficulties. My screen shut down, so I don't see you right now, but I'm back too.
Okay.
When I think about a counselor, that's really someone who's going to be more therapeutic at times. And I think sometimes like coaching has that element, but it's not a substitute for therapy. And so that is one thing that I want to throw out there that's like it's very different. I consider myself more of like a coach mentor combo. And I think that's because I like to show a lot of examples as I go through and define strategies and help my coaching clients. I think there's not enough enablers out there that like show and tell. I think that's where I can add a lot of value. And I want to change that in the industry as a whole. I want us to be able to show imperfect work because I think that establishes a lot of confidence
Yeah.
in, in yourself. If you haven't seen it, you don't know, is my work good? Is it bad? You have nothing to gauge it against. So I think show and tell really comes in handy there.
Yeah, and I had not heard of the idea of a counselor in this sense before. That's interesting, and I think one of the distinctions I'm feeling from what you're saying is mentors probably most often will be within the industry, like they know your world. A coach, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think mentors could also, if you're working on a specific skill, they might be someone different. I've had mentors within my company that actually were on the marketing team, like not
Mm.
directly. So, like a lot of times in enablement, you don't have internal mentors that can be available to you, or your boss hasn't done enablement before. So, that's how I've reached out for other industries for mentors. But I think generally, yeah, I think that's a really good distinguishing summary.
And so to that point, when you think about coaches in general,
Mhm.
what's their typical background? Are they PhDs? Are they like, like what how do they become coaches? What's their background?
Yeah, I mean, typical is probably not a word I would include. I think everyone
Yeah.
sort of comes from a different background. You either have people who come from a very formal certification, and you'll see like all the letters at the end of their name,
Yeah.
or there'll be someone who comes from your industry and has like real world experience and is looking to share that with others. And so I think those are really the two different avenues that come together. And there's pros and cons to each of those different avenues.
Yeah, and I think that lends to some questions I think I'll ask later on about
Sure.
when does one who skews more towards the letters after the name versus
Yeah.
practical experience, when does that apply better to this type of situation versus that? But I think we'll get back to that.
Sure.
Maybe so for the folks listening and are wondering, do I need a coach? Do I need a mentor? Like who typically uses a coach?
Yeah. Again, I think that word typical is probably going to
I'm
have to be
sorry.
eliminated from the vocabulary just because it's so, it's unique to the individual. And so everyone's coming from a different angle. So
Yeah.
I have coaching clients from all different backgrounds. These are either mid-career professionals, like people that are looking to really have growth or looking for clarity because they've been like a figure it out type of person in their role. This could be, I've had executives, I've had directors that are like, how do I get to VP level? Or VPs that are like having imposter syndrome about being a first time VP. Um, I've had individuals that are transitioning into new roles in industries. I mentioned that earlier. So I work with a lot of AEs that are like, you know what, I actually found my passion was enablement when I helped on those programs. And I don't know how my skills are transferable. Lots of ops folks that have like just that natural enablement ability, but want to stand out amongst other applicants. I think it can be someone who is struggling, or it can actually be high performers who want to accelerate their success. And then the last is like sometimes there's teams. Like I go to team offsites, and leaders are looking for enablement for their enablement teams, and so
Mm.
those are other areas. And I've got like client stories that I can even share if it's interesting to just like paint this even deeper
Sure.
than high level. So one person that comes to mind was a first-time manager. So she's a first-time people manager within enablement, and she really wanted to be promoted to a director level. And the company had L&D budget towards coaching, which I know you said you wanted to hit on again. And so we designed a custom program. It was a 10-hour coaching package that was geared completely towards the challenges that she was facing. And we leveraged her performance review from the last cycle to be
Mhm.
able to determine like where are areas that we're going to focus. And so we completed the sessions over a quarter period of time, and we set her up for success, and she achieved her promotion by that next promotion that cycle, which I think was really exciting. So someone who's a top performer, already recognized for being great, but really wanting to punch it to the next level and show that she was strategic, not just tactical. Um,
It's always really good. It's really top of mind for me all the time that professional athletes have coaches, and so
yes,
it's sort of like the great to greater. Like it's at every level. There's room for improvement or keeping your skills polished. So I think it's not just for those struggling. I think you make the really good point that I think it's worth emphasizing of the best have coaches, and the reason they're the best because they know how to take the feedback, and they're open to getting better at their craft.
absolutely. And I think the next story is really one that like you and I overlap on a lot. One of my most uh practical, tactical, programmatic packages is my career trajectory package, and that's for job seekers. And so this one is an AE that was transitioning into enablement. They really needed confidence to understand like how are the things that I was doing in sales transferable to enablement? How do I speak using enablement language that's going to resonate with hiring managers to show that this is just not me, moving out of sales because I'm tired of the hustle, but because this is really a passion. And I one of the first things I do with that type of client is I talk about how enablement is sales. We're just selling internally, and we're selling behavior change. So it's not like a physical product that we're selling. And when they can start to think through the lens of their own process and say, like, oh, you all do analysis on a program the same way I would do discovery for my product. Like when they start to think through their full sales process and they can relate that, oh, I do multi-threading with clients. You do multi-threading internally with strategic partners. Like when they start to think through it in that way, they build a lot of confidence to like, okay, I know what I'm doing here, even if I haven't been there, done that in this exact scope before.
Yep, I love that example. It's clearly it's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's really appropriate one for a lot of folks who are trying to break in, and they're they they don't know what they don't know. And I think to your point, there are some things that they don't haven't experienced and don't know much about, and things that
Mm-hmm.
are directly transferable. Helping them recognize what each of those two things are is a very big benefit. Um,
That's absolutely right.
so, so again, this is very 101 in a lot of ways, but I want to get really tactical for a minute. Like,
Sure.
and you touched on this a minute ago in terms of some packages, but like, how does it work? So, like, in terms of a coach, like, just how does it work? You mentioned you 10 hours for this, but like, how do people? I'm not gonna say typically, but how might a person work with a coach?
Yeah, yeah, and it's different for everyone. And I've refined my packages over the time of, my business evolving from a side hustle to a full-time business. And you learn from other people who have been there and done that before you as to what works best. So I would say the cost structure will either fall into one of two categories usually. Usually you'll see packages or you'll see retainer models. There are a few people who will still charge by the hour, but that was one of the lessons I learned really early on is like a lot of potential clients think they want to just have like an hour of coaching, right? But you can't actually put together outcomes, hold someone accountable, and actually see results within an hour of just dropping knowledge. And so that's where these packages really are generated to provide the best outcome for the clients. And so cost structure is set up that way. I would say individual payments, I'm very casual. Like I accept as informal as Venmo or Zelle. I've got PayPal, so like if a company needs an invoice, that's definitely something that I leverage for invoices and receipts. But I would say another thing is like people also need the receipts for if they're using their unemployment benefits for tax deductions. That's one where like I'll go through PayPal instead of informal. And then the other side is corporate sponsored. So you wanted to touch back on that. I think that
Yeah.
that's really another way that people start to pay for these types of packages. I think the last thing that I'd share is like my packages range. They range anywhere from, I've got a starting package that's around 1,600. That's really like someone who's really wanting to test out the relationship and understand if coaching is right for them, all the way up to like 10K retainers, where I'm working with someone on an ongoing basis on really large strategic initiatives.
And within that, I know again that's a huge range between the smaller
Yeah.
package to the bigger package. But what like a frequency, or is it over Zoom? Like just get really tactical for a second of how do these things work, and is there homework? Like just dive into it for a second, because again, for those who have never experienced it, I want to demystify it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So I talked about how I have a really programmatic coaching program, which is my job seeker one. That comes with a true checklist in a spreadsheet that I call the career trajectory action plan. And it's something that we go through and we like mark off all of the items that we're going to do in an agreement. And it covers all sorts of things from like resume reviews, a mock interview process, a LinkedIn review, the project part of the interview process. I help them navigate that. I work on their personal branding side. So it's got all of those things that we go through and check off.
Yeah.
That is my most programmatic. The other side of it is when you enter into a custom coaching package, I start with like a goals template. So I have homework for the person before our first call even starts, before we even set up our coaching package together, where they capture their goals. And then we turn that into an outline and a structure for what our program will be. Now that's flexibility within a framework. We can change things and add things, or double down on things if we're going and we find we need to pivot, but it at least gives us a starting point where we're not just like willy-nilly getting on a call and be like, what do you want to talk about today? And so there's usually prep work, which is I'll ask a few questions, or I'll ask them to share a few resources, or I'll ask them to share what questions they have on the topic is a good way to prep. We'll get into the call. We'll navigate that topic together. I do a little bit of like teach, show, do. So it'll be like, I will share information. I will show how I've done things in the past. And then we'll talk about how to activate internally and what their fears and challenges and obstacles would be. I capture all the action items and I send them a summary after that call, what our commitments are and when our next conversation is. So very similar to like a sales process. You got to have your follow-up, you got to have your agenda, you keep it tight like that. Frequency of meeting you asked about, I'd say those are typically like bi-weekly to monthly, depending on how long the program is, or if we're focusing on something very specific versus generic. It's short enough in duration that like we don't want to lose sight of our goals. Like you don't want to go too long without talking, because then you lose some of that accountability. But it's long enough that you can actually like put the concepts into action before the next call. I think that's really the important distinguishing factor there. Yeah.
Just one question. Do you feel as though is the process you just described, is that common amongst others, or is that more of a unique to you thing? Like, because again, I want to get a sense of, I want people to have a sense of how does this work in general for coaches in general. Is that a pretty common way of structuring these things and holding accountability?
I think everyone has their own unique way. I use a lot of what I learned in enablement and turn it meta, right? So like how I would manage stakeholders is how I manage my coaching clients as well. But I know that there are coaches that are accredited that follow a model that is, through ICF, which is the coaching federation. They've got a model that they leverage as well. That's like their flow of their conversation, and they've got resources and templates that they leverage through it as well. It's a little bit more generic, but it is something that is like super helpful. Like I've had a friend that has leveraged those same templates and personalized them herself to be more fit for purpose. And I think it's really where you take a combo approach of like, okay, I got structure, I got frameworks, I got models, but I'm making it fit for purpose for you. Someone who's going to go that extra mile is going to be more effective than someone who just like drops a generic template that you could Google on the internet.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Yeah. And I'd say that the one other thing to add around duration is these typically lasts around like 3 to 6 month time limits. And that's based on the size of the package, but it's also based on flexibility of partnership. Once that's complete, then I've got those annual retainers with other clients too. But I want to make sure there's a mutual fit first. So like
Sure.
some of these you can like determine like, oh, that was great, but now I feel like I got what I need, or that was great, I need more.
And earlier on, you touched on this idea of when people are on the smaller packages, they're kind of just testing the relationship and they're just
Mhm.
seeing if it's right for them. So I think the point I want to dive into now is picking a coach because like a life partner or your therapist or whatever, like these things, it's all about the match
Yeah.
and how well you challenge and work with each other. And so in this world, how does one pick a coach? What do you look for? How should that work?
Yeah. Well, let's start with like how you can find one, right? Because I think like it's if you didn't know that I existed, like would you know to even Google enablement coach, right? Like that wasn't something that existed a while ago. So I don't know if people would think to do that. I think the first thing is like referrals. You'll hear a lot of referrals from trusted peers or industry networks. You can search for specialists in your field. So, or if there's a specific topic you're looking to focus on, like there's people who focus on imposter syndrome, or there's people who focus on change management in particular. So, like, there's people who dive deep into one topic versus spreading themselves across an industry. There are coaching directories. So things like ICF or ATD is the Association of Talent Development. Those have coaching directories of like people that they would recommend as coaches. Or there's professional associations like Revenue Enablement Society, Sales Enablement Collective. Those have like online networks where you can ask the question and people can provide their feedback on who they would want as a coach. Honestly, I've had about 50% of my clients come from non-professional social media, which I think is really fascinating. So I do work on TikTok and Instagram, and it's just like, those trigger moments for enablement professionals or, top lessons learned. And I actually find that people have found me through that weren't on my LinkedIn network. And for me, like my LinkedIn network is over 11,000 professionals. And so for people to find me that aren't in that, I think is really cool without me having to like truly sell myself in that
Those are
way.
enablement people who are finding you on TikTok and Instagram, but not
Yes, the
on.
algorithms work. The
Right.
algorithms work. I know. And then the one thing that I have the highest conversion rate from is actually my like wind down with Whitney sessions, which I posted a few times. That's something that I do to give back to the community. It wasn't meant to be a lead format for me, but it is something where they get like a tiny taste of the value they can receive from ongoing engagements with me. And so they've got a sense of my personality, how I work, what I show. And so I think some people do like free trials and things like that. I don't have the time to scale something like
Sure.
that because I've got, like you heard earlier, a variety of pies I've got my hands in. But I found that really gives people a good sense to feel confident in making an investment, which I think sometimes investments can be scary.
Okay, so the moral of that story is it can come from anywhere,
Yeah.
even unexpected places like random social media that might just kind of figure it all out. But
Yeah.
the thing I heard loud and clear is referrals are a key thing of people who might have had good experiences with a certain coach. Uh, is a good thing, but sounds like kind of an all the above, like it can come from anywhere. So okay, I find you on Instagram or a referral. How do I test the waters with you? How do I interview you? How do I figure out if we're actually a good match for this type of relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hold a discovery call where we talk about the coaching goals and like what someone's looking to accomplish. And that's really where we determine if it's a good fit. I would say like there's a bit of sales in that conversation. And my profession, like my personal style is I sell against. So I talk about why you don't need a coach. I talk about why I might not be the right fit. And if someone after all of that still feels really confident, then they're usually like my type of person that's going to be persistent and action oriented and committed to the program. And so that's where like it's a mutual testing in that scenario. But for folks that are looking to like interview any coach in particular, I would say like come with a clear point of view on what you're looking to achieve. Not just like, I think I need a coach. Like come have put some thought into it before you get on that type of call. Do your research on their background, and if you can find anything on their coaching philosophy, you can understand their approach. Like, are they the type of person that's going to be like challenging? Are they going to be someone who challenges you in particular? Are they going to be someone who's like super supportive and just does what you want them to do? Or do they have a bit of both? Like I said earlier, like I've got really prescriptive templates that I use, but I also have custom goals worksheets and coaching docs and action plans that I leverage to share. Does every coach have that? No. So like those are things that like if that's something that's important to you to make sure that you're maximizing your investment, you want to make sure that you vet out like what that process will look like with someone. And I would say like don't be afraid to ask for success stories or testimonials. I think that people who have been doing this for a while will have that type of information. And I love putting people in touch with my past clients, especially in the enablement space, just because that's now part of your network after you've had those introductions. And then I think the other thing that people have talked about that made them feel comfortable was like listening to podcasts or the thought leadership pieces that have been shared. So a lot of coaches will post on LinkedIn or be on podcasts. You can hear from them in that as like a snippet or a preview of what your experience or engagement will look like with them, and if there's like a style match there.
I'm going to ask a question that I don't know if there's an opinion answer or a factual answer, but you said a minute ago this idea of some coaches are more challenging, some are more do what you want to do. Is one more appropriate or effective than the other? Meaning, if there's a coach who just does what you say, is that appropriate in some situations, or like that's really not going to be that effective for you? Like, because again, I think sometimes if it's not uncomfortable, it's probably not pushing in the right ways. It's probably my opinion, but help me
It's a good
understand.
opinion. Yeah, we share that opinion. I would say I'm definitely more of a challenger, and I've turned away a client once that I had to, tell on our discovery call that they had a challenge with authority, and like they didn't take that feedback really well. And I was like, okay, if you're not able to take this feedback on this call, like how are you going to enjoy the coaching experience where I'm giving tough love all the time, right? So I think that there's definitely an aspect of that where I think it's important to be able to challenge someone to grow. But there are some people who are looking to like achieve a very specific goal and they want XYZ and they're almost in the driver's seat for the coaching engagement. And I think in that category, like you're fine to find someone who will do the things that you want them to do. But I would say the coaching clients that I work with are more open to the style and approach of being challenged for growth.
All right, I think we're related. You talked about like coaching philosophy a second ago, but what do you look for in these things? Because again, we were talking earlier about domain expertise and a few other things, but how do I help me understand the calculus I would make to figure out, is this the right person? Because I think we're touching on it, but I feel like there's more depth there. Can you dive deeper?
Yeah, well, this is where you have to think about what's important to you, right? So when I say like come with a point of view before you go into an initial coaching discovery call, like think about what is most important to you and what you value. And so this is almost like determining your personal like ICP, like you would help a sales team determine their ICP. Like think about what your ICP for a coach would be. And so do you highly value someone that has knowledge in your industry? This can be super helpful, but it's not always necessary. So it depends on the type of coaching you need. For enablement professionals, I think industry expertise is a very strong advantage. I think you can feel really confident with someone who's been able to navigate, but you run the risk of them being more of a mentor that's just going to give you solutions on how they did it versus truly being a coach. So that's where like someone who's been more of a long-term leader, has like honed their people leadership skills, I think would probably be a better fit in that sense. But yeah, it comes down to personal preferences. Like there are certain people that, have preferences on, gender or other areas there. So I think it's sometimes it's easier to relate to someone who has those types of shared experiences. I have an incredibly diverse clientele, but I would say over 50% of my clients are highly ambitious women in a mid stage of their career. And I think that I really enjoy that demographic because we unpack a lot of personal blockers, things that I have experienced and I can relate to, things like getting over and getting past people pleasing tendencies from being an oldest child, right? All the way into like imposter syndrome and burnout from the hustle and the grind of trying to prove yourself to in a like male dominated tech space. Like there's other topics that just come out as you're coaching on tactical enablement strategies where it sometimes is helpful to have someone who has your type of background or experience in that way.
Yeah, and I think to your point, just being very specific for a second, if I were a woman working at a bro culture tech company, and it's like all guys, and I'm feeling some issues where it's like I'm being looked at a certain way or treated a certain way or passed over for whatever, like getting the person may not necessarily need to be in enablement, but obviously should be a woman. Like I think there's to your point, there's certain things that depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, you can lean one direction or the other of domain expertise versus gender or whatever. Like I think there's all those things that I think as you look at the problem you're trying to solve or the advance you're trying to make, you can then skew one direction or the other based on that. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I had a client that worked in the partner enablement space, and he was really passionate about working. One of the things I tried to sell him against was like, I've managed partner enablement, but I was actually pretty far removed from the tactical elements. And so I wasn't able to do a lot of show and tell in that category. And the part that he was looking to bolster was actually the sales enablement side of partner enablement. And I was like, got you on that one, right? So there's other sides that were more important to him than some of the lived experience or even career experience. And he was able to navigate and refocus on the things that were important for his personal growth and his goals.
So we're talking to a coach. We found them from wherever our source was. And I take your point from before of, much like in a sales cycle, people do so much research before they engage with the sellers. I feel like to your point, a person can do a lot of research and find things you post on LinkedIn or podcasts to get a sense of you. But beyond that, if I engage with you ever first call, how do you try before you buy, or can you? How does a person start to get a sense of this beyond just philosophy and podcasts?
Yeah. I mean, there are things that are more interactive than just listen and learn, right? Like you could join a webinar that they host and ask questions that are specific to you to see how they respond to the things that are most important to you. And like I said earlier, many coaches do offer free trials or discounted intro sessions. Those are things that a lot of coaches do. I just personally haven't been able to scale that. So the way that I've found where people get to try is the wind down with Whitney session. And that's one that like, I host it for the community. It wasn't intended to be like a trial portion. This is meant to give back my time.
Yeah.
But it is something that I think has been helpful for folks. And then I capture the key takeaways of that in an Instagram story. So we're getting social media again, but like everything that I talk about, I summarize like, hey, I talked to a senior director. These are the challenges that we covered. And here are the top takeaways that I provided. Because these are short 30-minute conversations. So it's really easy to summarize the key areas, and I link out to some of the resources I share. So even if you're not on that call directly, by understanding what that call looked like, you can see what my style is from that. But I think other than that, check for people that will do free trials because some will.
Is the concept of we're going to do one session first, paid or otherwise, and just get a sense of that of can we define the problem or the ambition together and then see if you ask good questions and there's a rhythm here?
I would say that's probably part of my discovery call, right? Where I talked about how I have a template that someone fills out with their coaching goals and I sell against, and we see if they can handle my challenging style and if they are excited about the structure that I'm proposing. Those are things that I think we test the waters on that call and that conversation. But that usually ends with like a yes, no decision. There's really not something that is a trial or we get into it. If we have time left, like I give that full 30 minutes. So like, even if it is a no and we determine that early on, I do tell them like, hey, you've got my full 30 minutes. So if you want to ask me anything, like go for it. This time is yours. And I do get into like a little bit of coach mentor concept. I've had some people like be like, oh no, I really want this after that. But I've also had people be like, thank you, that's all I need right now. Right. So that call, I think, gives a little bit of it, but I don't really do free trials or discounted sessions.
Yeah, and I think there is a sense you can get a sense with a low investment whether or not this person style works with your style.
Mhm.
So it just as though I want people to feel comfortable to engage with coaches in general and not be intimidated. So I think that first thing helps. But what if I don't know, we're a month in to
Mhm.
or 2 months into a multi-month engagement. And I feel like, you can only take me so far and I want to go beyond that. Or your style, I find you generically, your style
Yeah.
of challenging is not really working for me. And so this is not working out. How do you break up? Do you break up? What happens when it's not working out?
Yeah. I mean, everyone has free will, so you can break up. It's okay. Um, I would say have an honest conversation about what's missing. And I think that that can be challenging to tell someone that something's not working, but you're paying for this service. So I think it is important that you get what you need out of it. And so I would say don't wait till the end of the contract, like give feedback along the way. And I personally start and end each one of my sessions with that opportunity because I know it's hard to like raise your hand and give feedback. So I open up that discussion, like any feedback from the last session. Okay, how did today go? Here's what we're doing next time. Does that sound good? Like, I want to make sure that someone has the opportunity to deliver feedback to me in multiple instances. And then even my closeout process, I've got like a survey opportunity. I get feedback as I close each section as like, how was that on a 1 to 5, right? Like it's the enabler in me. Like I want the smile sheets, survey scores to know that I'm doing well, but also to know if we need to pivot something. So like it's really important to me to know early on if we need to pivot or make adjustments so that you're getting the most value out of the opportunity. I would say if that's the case, like consider adjusting the structure or the focus of the coaching and ask for what you need. And I think that a lot of coaches will be flexible with that. Like I'm personally flexible with that. Like I said, I have one really programmatic thing and I run people through that in detail and gain commitment in advance. But like outside of that, I'm very flexible. And while we put structure in, it's one of those things that if we need to double dive into this topic twice, we will go into that topic twice. We can always extend, like those types of things. So people are flexible to make adjustments. Just ask for what you need. And then if it's still not a fit, I would say move on. I think coaching relationships should feel really valuable, not forced. I think you can ask for alternatives to explore. I often refer potential clients that I don't think are a fit to other coaches that I know in the industry, in the space, people who I've worked with, people who have worked for me before. And so I think as a coach who's worked with a variety of clients, you get more and more comfortable directing and redirecting someone if it's not a good fit.
And I'm going to state the obvious here that this is your money you're investing. This is your career you're working on. These are important things. And I think it's incumbent upon the person to be honest.
Yes,
And in terms of what's working, what's not working. So when you do your end of session check-in of what worked, what didn't work, you just got to be honest, right? You got to say what was good and what was not good. And if you're just saying, "Oh, it was great," and just smiling and not being sincere, you're doing yourself a gross disservice. And so
absolutely.
I want to just again, it's your career, it's your money. There's a lot at stake here, and so if you're not being fully candid with the good and the bad, it's only hurting yourself. I have a friend of mine who's told me years ago. He's like, "Yeah, I sometimes lie to my therapist," and I'm like, "What are you doing?"
No benefits there.
Right.
Yeah.
It benefits nobody. And so,
Yeah.
I think here that's a sort of extreme example, but I think it's really important that as you move through this relationship, the candor is at the level of 10
Yeah.
and both good and bad, and it only serves to benefit you. And I think
Totally.
the whole purpose of coaching is to raise you up and elevate you in your career. Speaking up and advocating for yourself is part of growing your career. And so it's a small place to practice this skill of advocating in candor. And so I think it's a really important point that I want to make sure people realize you can be honest if you're like, this is just not working, that's a boss move, and you get to do it.
Yeah. And I'll share as a coach, like I'm equally as invested in you finding success from this program. Like that's how I attract other clients is from having these successful engagements. So if you don't feel comfortable verbalizing that type of feedback live on the call, you're someone who needs to process, like feel free to send that in an email. And like the questions that I would ask myself after the call would be like, what part of that conversation was most helpful for me? And what part of that conversation was least helpful for me? Or like, what part did I not feel good about? Like, so like if you phrase it that way and give that feedback, that's something that someone can pivot on. Because I once had to challenge a client. You said like, oh, they say, oh, that's great. And it's like really generic. They didn't get specific enough for me. So I asked them those two questions afterwards. And I was able to get a lot more clarity on like how I could make the next session even more impactful for them.
I have a hard time breaking up with people who are cutting my hair and want to move on to a new person. So like I know these things are, it's hard, right?
Hard. Yeah.
You don't want to hurt their feelings and you have a thing going there. But again, if the goal is to advance your career, you got to stand up a little straight
Yeah.
and be assertive. And this is all part of that. And that's how your career grows. And it's good to practice. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. Um, I'd love to kind of summarize it all and just maybe if you take a step back at a very macro level, just what do you think? What's the impact or potential impact of a really good career coach on a career?
Yeah. Well, and I'll even take it one step further and think about in enablement specifically, right? Like I remember feeling alone and that I had to figure out everything by myself. I remember that point in my career in enablement. And so I think my biggest value of coaching is to recognize like you are not alone and you don't have to be is like the thing that rings true and like what I think gravitates a lot of people towards coaching. I would say remember that a coach is a strategic partner in your professional development. They help you to identify your goals, they help you to build necessary skills and to overcome obstacles that you're experiencing. So whether that is, career transitions or personal development, strategic thinking, executive presence, like whatever it is that you're looking to work on, there's a coach that can really be a beneficial partner in your growth for that.
I think that's spot on. It's sort of like in the workplace, the company defines your goals, right? It's to hit a
Yeah.
certain number or to do a certain thing. It's their goal, not yours. In coaching, it's you. It's your goal, what you set with the coach. And so it is ideally it's so tailored to you and what you're trying, the areas you're trying to grow. And so I think it's just your benefit to lean into it. And if you do it right.
Absolutely.
Whitney, you're the best. There's a reason everyone loves you, and myself included. I am one of your biggest fans, and I say that quite sincerely. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I think it's really helpful for a lot of folks who are, these days it's a tricky time. A lot of people are losing their jobs or feeling at risk, and so knowing that there are tools out there like coaches that can help them navigate these turbulent waters is a really big gift. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Dave.